thanks everyone for being here on a very beautiful Sunday evening. I must say this has been a really an incredible learning experience for me the last couple months. I went from being chair of this, sleepy little organization that nobody wanted to be really a part of, to suddenly being in the eye of this storm that was engulfing Province House, and I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the incredible friends and colleagues I have in the film industry and what they're capable of, and I also learned a lot about our democracy and our process of engagement with government. And first of all, I'll just say that I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy. I do feel that what we were able to accomplish in our advocacy will allow the film industry to continue to operate here and hopefully at some point, really flourish. I do think there's an opportunity here, and I just want to make sure that people understand my perspective on this. That being said, there are a lot of challenges ahead of us too, and there were some very, very dark days during this sort of crisis that we faced for our community and for our industry. Marc talks about stories, and there's just one sort of moment in particular that was very, very powerful for me. Was in the lead up to the announcement of the budget. There's a process referred to as a budget lockup, and at this point we already knew that changes were coming because the Minister of Finance, Diana Whalen, had said that had alluded to such effect at the pre-budget announcement on March 25th. So I was invited to go into this thing called the budget lockup, where they take all kinds of people from different industries, different community groups, and they bring you into this room. I was in the Marriott, and they basically announce to you the details of the budget about 2 hours before the finance minister rises in the House of Assembly and basically starts divulging the details of the budget. And because it's referred to as a lockup, they confiscate your phone, and you have to sign something basically saying you will not communicate with the outside world during that time period you're in there. So I go in there, I'm one of the last people to get in, and they close the doors, and I managed to finally find a spot to sit down, and I start reading the budget document, and quickly came to realize that what they were proposing was far more radical than we even imagined. Basically, the idea they were shutting down film and creative industry in Nova Scotia. They were, making the film tax credit 25% refundable and 75% non-refundable, which effectively made it useless. Basically every program that supported my industry and my community was gone. And I learned that within the first 5 minutes, and then I had to sit there for the next 2 hours as they went through all the other, budget, agenda items, and I was kind of in a way left with my thoughts, and it was a very lonely moment, a lonely experience, because there were some people around me who were very aware of the implications, but for me it was a reflection of the fact that all the projects that we're working on for the last couple of years were probably disappearing. This is millions of dollars of in production budgets that I've been working so hard on, and my family and I were probably gonna have to move. I knew that all my friends and colleagues in the community, my community, were gonna be devastated by this, and I had to kind of just sit there and think about what am I going to tell them, and what are we going to do. And it was a very it was a terrible, lonely experience. And one thing I will say that I look back on and I kind of laugh now is that when I came out of the lockup, when they finally released us, I ran out to try and report to our group at Screen Nova Scotia, and I forgot my phone with the people that had confiscated all the phones. And by the time I got back, realizing my phone had been confiscated, the person had taken it to the Department of Finance, actually. and I couldn't communicate with the outside world, because of this fact that my phone had been taken, and I ended up later that day trying to track it down. And all the press were trying to call me through and reach me through this phone. Luckily, they were all at the legislature, and I was able to address them there. So that's, I mentioned that it was as a dark moment, but then I just come back to this idea that I think it's really quite remarkable what the community was able to accomplish from that day forward. And that is, like, there was this incredible sustained response to the government's plans that I think was respectful dissent, and that allowed us to really get our message through to say that this is a terrible mistake and you have to do something about it. And the two things I really took away from this whole experience, it's two words, and that is engagement and empathy. Number one, with engagement, I think, we have to look at ourselves, and say, we really made a terrible mistake in the fact that we were not properly engaged with the politicians and with the bureaucrats and with having basically an effective lobbying group. We're actually extremely lucky because there was so much apathy in our industry. We're talking about like an industry that contributes about, I don't know, it ranges, but around $150 million a year to the provincial economy. And yet we didn't really have a proper advocacy group. And that's, luckily we were kind of shaken out of our slumber by two critical events. One was on April 29, 2014, when there was a meeting of several producers with the Department of Finance that was brought about because of the initiation of the Broughton report. Laura Broughton was tasked with this tax and regulatory review. Basically, it was very clear to the people that attended, I wasn't there at this meeting, that there was an incredible amount of sort of animosity between certain key officials of the Department of Finance and our community, and that it was quite clear that well, we had known this for years, but there was this growing sense that the programs that support our industry were definitely under review and perhaps under threat, and that forced us to really come together and to form Screen Nova Scotia. And that's where we set up like a board of directors, and we just started putting in place basic infrastructure, which is, a Facebook page and a website and Twitter and all the really basic things, like, hiring our first employee, Tara McClare, like all these things that actually allowed us to have something that allowed us to respond to whatever might come down the road. And then the other key moment was on March 25th, 2015, when the finance minister mentioned that there would be changes coming down the road for the tax credit at her pre-budget speech, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and that allowed us again to really start mobilizing our community and making sure people were aware of the danger coming down the road. But if you think of it, if those two things hadn't happened, we would have been caught totally flat-footed, and our industry might have been at this point just a write-off. So it just shows the importance of, people may look down on the idea of lobbying, but to me it's actually a really critical thing where it's about engaging with the politicians, engaging with kind of key figures, and proving the worth of your industry, and also engaging the public and showing to them that this is something that's worth investing in. So that one thing, engagement, I think is really important for us all to take away from this. And the other thing I learned was the idea of empathy. Luckily, a friend of mine, Josh Bates, gave me a book, Graham, your book, What I Learned from Politics, and it was actually I'm sort of engaged in politics a little bit. I mean, I'm an NDP member and I donate regularly to the NDP, but I've volunteered a bit, but I'm not like heavily involved. And also, it would very important to say I'm not deeply partisan to the point where I don't recognize that the other parties bring a lot to the table and have done some really have put forward some really extraordinary policy on their own right. And so I have that, luckily that kind of understanding, like that politics is in a way a noble calling, although a lot of people don't like to look at it that way. But by reading your book, Graham, actually it allowed me to have a better insight as to what actually happens in sort of in the realm of what a politician faces and how difficult it is, and that there's so much pressure put on them to be right all the time, and to never back down from particular policy position unless there's a very dangerous situation there where once there's something put forward, it's very difficult for a politician to step back from it, and that it's very difficult for them to admit a mistake because people pile on, and us as the public, the press, put a lot of pressure on them, and so it was useful in my dealings with the politicians during this whole crisis to have that empathy and to have that understanding how difficult it must be for them, and to be constantly thinking about how do we make it possible for them to sort of step back from this whole thing and save some face, and to that was something that was always going on in the back of my mind during this whole thing, and that was really difficult, I'll tell you, because you have your emotions in the midst of this crisis. You're so emotional, and the people around you are emotional, and there's just this idea that we've got to go for blood, we've got to do something to fight them, and in the end, it's like, yes, it's important to fight back and to express the importance of your position, but at the same time, you need to do it in a way where it allows them to meet you in some way. And so that was what I learned about this whole experience, was that it's important to be engaged and trying to avoid this kind of circumstance in the first place. And then if this kind of thing does happen, then to have empathy for the people you're dealing with, even if they're threatening your livelihood. So that was sort of my initial thoughts. So I'm happy to sort of pass the torch here.